Chapter 6. We are in part 2 of our book, which is why do people make art? And we're looking at some of the different themes. And chapter 6 is on reproduction and sexuality. So what we're going to look at is a variety of figures to start with. And our example right here is a Henry Moore, 20th century, late 20th century, 1983, draped, reclining mother and baby. This is a big bronze, bigger, more than 10 feet long, and this is sort of our image of a mother and child, highly abstracted. But what we're going to focus on is sexuality, reproduction, fertility in this chapter. And you have to remember, it's kind of hard to think about, but we don't have hospitals at this point in time. This is, 8,000 years ago, 6,000 years before the year 0 BCE. We don't have a way, to take care of the mother, make sure the pregnancy goes well, that kind of thing. Everything's a mystery. So you have to think that there's a lot of focus on making sure that babies are born. And remember, too, sadly, that mortality rate for infants is quite high back then. So the idea of what to do and how to do it was important. And you're thinking about, moving the species forward, moving the culture forward in your community. Also at this time, as we looked at chapter 5, we're starting to move from hunter-gatherer into farming and into having some social structures and political structures and the beginning of towns. So people would start to gather around rivers and start to build their network of buildings, and their community religion at this time starts to flourish because we're figuring out what matters to us in this particular place and time. Okay, so this fertility figure is found at Catalhuyuk in Turkey. So this is from our chapter 5 area that we were looking at under shelter. And this was found in a grain bin. So we're thinking, because that's how it was found, and you have to kind of remember when we're excavating things, there's a lot of information lost, almost all the information, but the assumption here is because we found her in a grain bin that perhaps she has to do with the harvest and the ritual fertility of the harvest. So fertility for a lot of cultures is not just the mother being pregnant. It's also to do with the abundance of the harvest, right? So that there's rain coming, enough rain, and there's a lot of fruit on the branches and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is a Neolithic piece, small sculpture, and there's a lot of these made. We're going to look at an even older one, but the bellies and the breasts and the thighs, for some reason, are all accentuated as images or parts of fertility. Okay, so she is perhaps a goddess that, may have dominated these rituals for a long period of time. Oh yeah, and there's these lions here. She's on a throne. So we think that this goddess may be very important because we see her seated on a throne. This is one of the oldest art examples in the world, period, and it also is connected to fertility. This is the Venus of Willendorf. This is 25,000 BCE, so this is potentially 27,000 years old, and it's a little carved stone piece. Now, we don't know for sure because, we're still discovering things, but whether the cave paintings or these little sculptures came first. We think that the cave paintings right now came first because that's the oldest things we've found so far. But this is a sculptural piece, and this is very small. It's only about 4.5 inches high. So they think that it's possible that she was held during childbirth. The original thought or theory on this piece was that it was a fertility goddess that was placed somewhere, because in our present day culture, we place things on the mantelpiece or we place things in the museums and so on. But we have to strip all that away and think about what is important to that culture and what potentially is their mechanism for display, or what is their idea of an important use of this object. So we think because it's so small that it might have been held during childbirth. There's also the possibility that fertility is warding off death, a wish for good health or good fortune. And again, she's got large breasts, large belly, indicating pregnancy perhaps, and big thighs. Now, think about also different eras of images of beauty have to do with a women's figure. Often that's what we see depicted in the culture. So our culture now would be, the ideal thin woman. Um, we do appreciate large breasts and large rear end, derriere, I would say, in the culture at this moment. But there's times where smaller breasts are important, or it's like it will change. And also, a heavy set man perhaps would have been a sign of wealth and prosperity. So that the idea that somebody is heavy would mean that there's a lot of food and there's a good resource there. So that's also part of a depiction of an image of a figure. So it's not realistic. We don't know quite about why there's not a face on this piece. She's got this stylized hair. And this stylized hair motif, you see this repeated even in through early Greek sculpture, which is kind of interesting. I don't exactly know how that evolved, but we think she is a talisman for good fortune as well. And then the next example we're going to look at how the physique is very different, as I was explaining to you. The ideals of beauty or the ideals of the culture are played out in the figure. And so this is, 20,000 years later, we're still, it's kind of hard to think about the math. Visuals are very helpful. And also I want to backtrack and just say on page 138, there's a great map of farming and our agricultural development, and it just kind of shows what we know of the ancient world and also the prehistoric world, Neolithic, Paleolithic cultures. So it's kind of nice. It shows you who's developing where and what sort of food sources. Like, for instance, in something that would probably be modern day Peru, 7,000 years ago, they were cultivating beans, and that's in the New World. And in the ancient world, wheat and barley are happening sort of in the is where we would say modern day Israel near Egypt. Okay, so things are developing. There's different meanings for different pieces, and I'm going to stop here.